Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the first video. This is going to be how we're doing youth for right now. So this is going to be some trial and error on both ends. So just bear with us as we start this. So yeah, so let's dive right in. Coming off of Easter weekend, being last weekend, I felt like it was a great time for us to talk about the crucifixion and the resurrection. Kind of talking about like what this time this past weekend was all about. Yeah, so we'll just dive right in. We're gonna be in Matthew chapter 27, right? Matthew chapter 27. I'll give you some time to turn there. So basically, I'm gonna sum up some of the parts, that way this video is not super long. Yeah, so we'll just get right into it. So we see that Jesus is taken, he's arrested. By this time he's arrested. Peter and Judas have already betrayed, Judas has betrayed him, Peter has denied him. So he's already been arrested, and he gets taken to Pilate, and then this is where Pilate starts to believe that Jesus is innocent. But he still brings Jesus in front of the people at the time, and he gives them the choice between choosing to let Barabbas free or choosing to let Jesus walk free. And for those of you who don't know, like, Barabbas is this really, really bad dude. He's a notorious criminal, is how he's introduced to us in the story. So not a good guy. You don't walk around, especially compared to like Jesus, who all he did was love the people and is the Son of God. But yeah, so they choose to let Barabbas walk free, and they choose to crucify Jesus. That was actually the request, because Pilate's like, oh, well, what do I do with Jesus? Then they're just chanting, crucify him. So then Pilate takes some water, washes his hands, and says, well, and symbolizing like, oh, like this blood isn't on my hands. And he even goes on to say that, and then the people say that we take responsibility for his death, and so do our children, in verse 27. So then Pilate releases Barabbas, and then Jesus is taken to go get, it says that he's taken to go get flogged with a lead-tipped whip. So something to know about the Romans is they were some of the most prolific killers in the world at this time. When I first think of Rome, I think of the Roman Colosseum and how it was basically designed for them to kill for sport. So they had murder, like killing, like all that down to a science. Like, they knew exactly how many times they could hit you with like the whip or whatever, before, with the cat of nine tails or whatever it was, before you were to die. So like if it took them 30 hits or whatever to hit you before you died, they'd hit you 29, just so you'd wish you were dead and you just weren't there yet. So yeah, like the Romans, they were prolific, gruesome people that just had like murder and killing down to a science. So with Jesus being handed over to the Romans to be crucified, like, something that we need to know is like they definitely like had the ability to kill Jesus, and they definitely did, because if they didn't follow through with killing somebody that they were told to, then the punishment was even worse on them. So let that be known. Like, when Jesus was handed over to be crucified, it was handed over to some of the most prolific killers in the world at the time. So then we keep reading. In chapter 27, verse 27, it says, some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Some of the Gospels say it was a purple robe. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head. And then they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. They knelt before him in mockery and taunted him, "Hail the King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. They led him away to be crucified, right? So this is the time to where they mocked him, right? Jesus proclaimed to be king. He proclaimed to be Lord, and they mocked him for that. They dressed him up in scarlet or purple, which was at the time colors of royalty. So they dressed him up as a king to mock him, and then they taunted him, they spit on him, and then they led him away to be crucified after mocking him. We see in verse 32, the crucifixion. It says, along the way they came to a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene. The soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross, and they went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. The soldiers gave Jesus mixed with wine. That was terrible. Verse 34, the soldiers gave Jesus wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. That was because with that mixture, helped numb the pain, and Jesus didn't want the pain to be numbed. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice, also known as casting lots. They sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign fastened above Jesus' head, announcing the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, if you are the Son of God, save yourself and come down from the cross." That's referring back to what Jesus was saying, how some of his prior teachings, some of his prior words that he used, they're using them against him right now. The leading priests and the teachers of religious law and the elders also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. So he is the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross right now, and we will believe in him. He trusted God, so let God rescue him now, if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way, right? So we see all these people are just ridiculing Jesus. They're mocking him for the very thing that he is. He is king, and he's exactly what he proclaimed to be, and they mocked him for what his very existence was. I've been made fun of before in school, but I can only imagine what it must have felt like for Jesus. I don't have the mental capacity to fathom the kind of hate that Jesus was getting in this moment. It was something beyond even me and you can comprehend. And that's the point, right? Jesus went and he died, and his death is gruesome and so significant because he paid the price for our sins, right? He's dying for crimes he didn't commit. We see in verse 45 the death, and it says, "At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice." I am just not going to read that in Aramaic, but it says, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling out for the prophet Elijah. It's because in the first couple words he says, "Eli, Eli," and El, that's referring to God, because El means God, and it comes from the word Elohim. Just a little fun fact. So he was calling out to God, and he says, my God, why have you abandoned me?" But when they heard Eli, Eli, they thought he was calling out to Elijah. So it says, some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling out to the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled up a sponge with sour wine, holding it up on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him." Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At this moment, the curtain of the sanctuary temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split apart, and the tombs opened, and the bodies of many godly women and men who had died were raised from the dead. They had left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city of Jerusalem and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said, "This man truly was the Son of God." And then 55 it says, "And many women who had come from Galilee with Jesus to care for him were watching him from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee." Right. So within this moment, we see the death of Jesus. We see all this is leading up to it. We see the trial. We see him get denied, and then we see the trial, and then we see them mocking him, trying to belittle him, and then we see the actual him giving up his spirit, and we see how powerful that was. It was so powerful that the curtain, so little fun fact, the curtain, we've talked about this before, but just going to go back over it. So there was this curtain in the temples, and the curtain was here, and then like the holies of holies, the holiest place was right here, and then where the people were right here. Well, normal people couldn't go talk to God because the power of God and the presence of God was so powerful that if you were not ceremonially clean through a whole cleaning ceremony, then you would die, because that's how powerful God's nature and God's presence is. So only the priests could go talk to God, and they had to go through cleansing ceremonies, and even then sometimes it was too powerful for them. So with the temple, with the curtain being torn, it's no longer there being a place where people can go talk to God and like the people, right? It's not two separate places. Now it's one place. And that's why we get to pray to God, and that's why we get to have conversations with God, because the curtain is torn and Jesus bridged the gap, allowing us to talk with God, right? So it also says, like, there was an earthquake, and everybody within this moment, so everybody who saw this was like, oh my, like, this guy has to be the Son of God, right? Like it was just such a powerful experience to see Jesus giving up his spirit and Jesus finally completing the work that he has done, right? When I think of Jesus' entire story, I think of basically like the way I see it is the devil's trying to get Jesus killed, right? Like if Jesus dies, then I feel like the devil thinks he has like the victory. I think he thinks he's won. But that's just like not the case in the slightest bit, right? Because we see like these people who were praising him and throwing palm leaves on the ground in front of him are now chanting, "Crucify him," right? And then we get to the point to where Jesus finally dies, and I feel like in this moment, like Satan probably is thinking like, oh, like I have this thing won. This is in the bag. We move on and we figure out that that's not the case in the slightest bit, right? It says, as evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea, who had become a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. And Pilate issued an order to release him. Joseph took the body and wrapped it up in a long sheet of clean linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of rock, and then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting across from the tomb and watching. Right, so basically, Jewish men. It was Jewish people. It was a clean way, right? They were all worried about being clean and being ceremonially clean. So when you died, if you weren't buried, that was like the unclean. I don't know the exact terminology, but that was like the unclean way of life, of like being taking care of the body after death. They believed that you should be buried, you should be in a tomb, like you should have all those proper things to be done to your body, like once it was over. Basically, it was like, it meant like leaving the corpse unburied was some of the severest forms of like punishment in the afterlife and whatnot. So that's why Joseph said, he saw that Jesus was a Jewish man, and he said, like, I want him to be buried like in my tomb that I have for my family, and it's unused. So Pilate allows him to take Jesus, right? He allows him to have the body, and he's going to go put him in the tomb. He ends up wrapping him up basically like a mummy and puts him in the tomb. And then it says in verse 62, the next day on the Sabbath, the leading priests and the Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember that the deceiver," talking about Jesus, "once said, while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise from the dead.' So we request that you seal the tomb until the third day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing the body. And then telling everybody he was raised from the dead. If this happens, we'll be worse off than we ever were at first." Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure it the best you can." They sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. Okay, so right here, we see that they are trying to keep this body locked in, right? So the way tombs worked is there was an opening, and then you go inside, then there'd be places for the bodies to lay and whatnot. And so there was the opening, and then there was like a wall almost, and then there was the ground in front of it, in front of the opening of the tomb, and then there was like a incline that went down, and then like this. So basically the people would roll the stone, it would roll down the incline and land in front of the door. The stones weighed anywhere in between half a ton and up to 2 tons. So they could be pushed down this hill, over to and down the hill by 2 pretty strong guys, but pushing them out was a very big task because it had to go uphill. And you also couldn't just push it over from the inside because there was a wall on this side holding it. So it's like there was a wall, there was the stone, and then there was the tomb, right? So it couldn't be pushed over because there was a wall in front of it. Also, it would be really hard, basically impossible, absolutely impossible, for one person to move a 2-ton stone out of the way if from the inside with there being nothing to grab, right? So we see that even like knowing the anatomy and like how impossible it would be for people to move the stone out of the way, like the Pharisees and the people at the time were like, you know what, no, like we still don't trust these guys are crazy. So they asked if they could have, remember the prolific killers, the Roman guards, to be posted outside this, right? So they posted Roman guards. They put a 2-ton stone in front of the door, and they were still like worried that he would get out, right? So, right, we see that they keep putting roadblocks in the way, right? Like they're so scared of like what could happen if Jesus got out, right? They're so scared of this news that he was preaching of him being the Messiah, right? Well, we see in chapter 28, it says, early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothes was white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. The angel spoke to the women. Don't be afraid, he said. I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He isn't here. He's risen from the dead, just as he said it would happen. Come see where his body is lying, and now, go quickly, tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you. The women quickly ran from the tomb, and they were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. They rushed to give the disciples the angel's message, and as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they ran to him, grasping his feet, and worshiping him. Then Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers and leave for Galilee. They will see me there. Right? So we see that the very thing that they tried to use to keep Jesus locked in, the very thing that they tried to use to contain the Son of God and the message of Jesus, right? The very thing that they tried to use to hold Jesus down was sat upon by the angel, right? When I think of sitting, I don't think of sitting being an action, getting ready to fight, or if I'm going to start to do some heavy work, if I'm going to go start to work out or something, I'm not going to sit down first, right? Because once I sit down, like my attitude changes, right? I go from like a place of ready to do some work to like, oh, like sitting down is what you do like when the work is done. So when this angel is sitting down, I can almost imagine him like almost in a victory sort of stance with his hands behind his head and probably his legs crossed, just like looking around, maybe even whistling, waiting for them to come by. And he's like this is an attitude that the work is already finished, because by the time the stones rolled away, like it's over, right? The battle has been won. Jesus has had victory, right? The very thing that they tried to use to hold Jesus down, to keep Jesus locked up, is pushed away, is knocked out of the way. You know what? Sometimes I think we have some big stones, some big things in our life that we feel like are in our way and just need to be moved out of the way, right? Like right now, I just understand, like everybody with the coronavirus and everything going around, like there's so much anxiety and depression with not getting to see people, and you can fill in the blank with whatever's going on. But like right now in our world, like there is a lot of stones blocking the way of some tombs, right? And we need to see some people getting raised from the dead, right? We need to see some spiritual awakening right now in this country, in the middle of what's going on in your life, and your friends need it too. And like I understand that completely, because like there are so many things that are being used to hold us down and to block our path, right? But in the middle of trying to kill Jesus, right, death couldn't hold him, right? We see that the stones couldn't do anything. The most prolific nation known for killing, the most prolific people known for killing at the time, and even having them stationed outside the tomb, right? It's not enough to hold God. Let me tell you that those stones in your life that are like in your way, those roadblocks that you see, they are not bigger than our God, right? Our God is so much bigger than everything you're going through right now, right? There is so many things in our world that are used to hold us down and to give us anxiety and to push us further away from God. But let me tell you, our God is so much greater. We talked about David and Goliath and how David didn't even need to see Goliath before he was like, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's fight. Like everybody was like, oh, I don't know if you know what you're going into. And David's like, no, like I do. My God is greater, right? Jesus is greater. He's greater than sin. He's greater than death. This is the reason we're Christian. This is the good news, right? Because we don't serve the God who died. We serve the God who rose 3 days later, right? My God, your God, our God is alive and well today, still working in our lives, still helping us through, right? Like God is in the middle of this coronavirus, but sometimes we don't just look up and see it, right? Sometimes we're so focused, right? In the Gospel of John, this very same story, it says Mary was standing outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels sitting, one at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body had been laying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go get him." "Mary," Jesus says. She turned to him and cried out, "Rabbi," which means teacher. She said, "Don't cling to me," Jesus said, "for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go find my brothers and tell them, as I am ascending to my Father and your Father, my God and your God." Mary found the disciples and told them, "I have seen the Lord," and then gave them this message, right? Mary was so focused on her own problems. She was so focused on what was going on in her life. She was so focused on, like, I don't see Jesus. Sometimes I have my eyes closed and I'm looking for Jesus and I'm so frustrated I can't find him. Sometimes I'm covering my ears and then I'm like, God, I don't hear you. I don't see you, right? This virus is too big, right? Like my anxiety is too much. Like school's going on. My parents drive me crazy. Like, I don't know, right? Sometimes I'm looking for God, but I'm blindfolded. I refuse to take a blindfold off because I find comfort in it. If all I would do would look up and I could see God, right? If all I'd have to do is just understand, right? Mary has spent so much time with Jesus. Jesus was a friend of Mary's, and she mistaked him for a gardener. Let me tell you, I've never once looked at my friends and said, you know what? I don't know who these people are. Is that like they've called out to me and I know who they are? My parents have called out to me and I know who they are, right? But she's looking at her friend and she doesn't even recognize him, right? Because she's so focused on her problems. She can't see the solution, which is right in front of her, right? She's so focused on her problems, which is they've taken away Jesus, that she can't see the answer, which is Jesus, which is right in front of her. Right now, it is very hard for us to look up from our problems. With everything, we look in the news and we see it. We see, the world's ending and coronavirus is killing this many people, and everybody's freaking out because they're lost. Let me tell you, it's hard to have hope in Jesus when you don't know Jesus, right? It's very hard to not be able to look up and see Jesus when you are blindfolded, right? There are so many people right now that don't know Jesus, right? And this is the perfect time, right? We have all these outlets. We have different outlets. Yes, and it looks different for each and every one of us. Some of us are able to go to work and go to the store and we are able to see people there, but some of us are stuck in our homes. But you know what? There's Facebook. There's YouTube. We are so connected now that it's almost impossible for us to be contained, right? If the stone in the Romans and death itself can't contain Jesus, it can't contain Jesus today. Let me tell you, coronavirus may be big and scary, but it can't contain Jesus. It's not bigger than our God, right? Anxiety, depression, addiction, all those things are big stones, but let me tell you, they're not bigger than our God. They're not bigger than Jesus. If death and decay and the Roman government and crucifixion and dying on a cross, and dying a criminal's death and being mocked, and all those things were not enough to keep Jesus in the grave. There's nothing stopping you from there's nothing stopping you from going and telling people about Jesus, right? Like, how much do you have to hate somebody to not let them know the good news of Christ, right? And that's what this whole Easter season's about. It's about resurrection. It's about Jesus defeating death, coming back on the third day, right? Because we serve the God who rose 3 days later, right? We see that that's what this is about. That's what this time is about. But we don't need to just confine it to Easter, right? Easter is about celebrating the resurrection, but every Sunday should be about celebrating the resurrection, because Jesus is alive. He isn't just alive on Easter Sunday. He didn't just be resurrected and that was it. Like, he didn't just ascend to heaven and, I don't know what happened, right? No, we have a God who is actively in our lives, wanting a relationship with you, and he's just wanting you to uncover your eyes, take your hands off your ears. He wants to talk to you. He wants to spend time with you. And right now, we have more time than we ever have in our lives to devote to spending time with Jesus, but still we refuse to stay blindfolded. We still refuse to take our eyes off of what's going on in the news. We refuse to take our eyes off our problems, and we're unable to see our answer, which is Jesus. Like I said, every Sunday should be a resurrection Sunday. Every day we should celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, because he's alive and well, right? Yes, Easter's important. It's a great time to remember that Jesus is risen. But us being Christian, the thing that separates us is our God is risen. So I encourage you, as we move away from this Easter season, that we not forget that Jesus is still risen. He's still alive and very much well. And no matter what type of stone that's covering the entrance to your tomb, it can be moved. No matter how dark you think it is right now, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is Jesus. He wants a relationship with you, right? He loved you so much, he thought you were to die for. He came down from heaven, he lived a perfect life, and then he went and died a death. He died. He paid the price for our sins. He thought he cared about you so much, he went and died. He spent so much time in pure pain and agony for our cause. We need to celebrate the resurrection every Sunday. Jesus is alive and well, right? So, my challenge to you guys this week is to find a stone in your life that you can't move alone, right? There are so many things right now that all you have to do is go turn on the news. But there are a lot of things in our lives, especially right now, where they feel like there's huge stones, where those are the problems that we can't take our eyes off of, right, and see the answer, right? We have so many things in this world right now. I don't think it'll be very hard for you to find one of those stones in your life. The challenge part of this, though, is not finding it. The challenge part is letting God move it. After you find your stone, yes, like that's a good the starting point is understanding like what your problem is, but our solution is the same. It's Jesus. Right? Ask God to move this stone. Ask God for the answer to your problem. But instead of still looking at your problem and wondering why it's not changing, maybe we should put our head up, put our head down in our Bibles. God wants to talk to you. God wants to have a relationship with you. Spend some time with Jesus this week. Understand the price he paid. All right, so the challenge. Find a stone in your life this week and then ask God to move it, right? And expect God to move the stone out of your life. Thanks for watching. It's been great having it's been great being able to teach y'all, and even though like this is a different time, and even though like things are different right now, it's just how it's gonna have to be until everything kind of cools down. But this is trial and error. We're working through this. So yeah, thank y'all for just being so great and bearing with us. Y'all are the reason we're here, and I speak for me, Sean, Jesse, and Lindsay as well. We love y'all, and we hope y'all are doing well, and we can't wait to have our Zoom call with y'all and get to kind of discuss this a little bit more. So see y'all Sunday at 6.